When we think of a dysfunctional family, we usually picture chaos. But clinically, a dysfunctional family is the exact opposite. It is a highly structured, rigid system, fighting ruthlessly for its own survival. A family relies on homeostasis. When a central dysfunction introduces chronic instability, that balance is threatened. To prevent network collapse, parent nodes forcibly distribute the psychological load, locking child nodes into rigid, specialized structural roles to artificially restore stability. The tragedy of this mechanism is that authentic, age-appropriate child development is completely submerged. A child is no longer permitted to grow into an independent person. Their survival depends entirely on fulfilling a mutually exclusive systemic function. This table breaks down the 4 foundational survival roles generated by this triangulation: the hero, the scapegoat, the lost child, and the mascot. While these locked roles successfully prevent the family unit from collapsing during childhood, they exact a devastating, invisible toll on the individual's adult neurobiology, attachment styles, and long-term mental health. If siblings are raised in the exact same toxic environment, why do they develop such wildly divergent coping mechanisms? Clinical researchers call this the differentiation rule. A family system only requires one of each role to function, and the assignment is heavily dictated by birth order. Looking at data on the hero, we see a clear demographic pattern, predominantly the eldest child and heavily female skewed. Their systemic function is distraction through perfection. They act as a parentalized savior, masking core dysfunction by providing a facade of normalcy and competence. This Durkee Park network map isolates parental attitudes forging the hero. Mothers frequently exhibit indifference or replace their spouse with the child, forcing inappropriate responsibilities onto them. Fathers contribute by attributing false power to the child while remaining passive and physically absent in managing the family. This dynamic creates a specific form of emotional masking. The child learns that their basic needs are irrelevant, and conditional love is granted strictly in exchange for flawless, stress-absorbing performance. The hero's relentless drive for success functions as a chronic fawn response, a physiological strategy to earn safety by preventing the family's total collapse. The second survival role is the scapegoat. Traditionally assigned to the oldest or middle child, this individual serves as the identified patient of the family. Their systemic function is to act as a lightning rod. By acting out the family's repressed anger and dysfunction, they provide a convenient distraction. If the parents are busy fighting the scapegoat, they aren't looking at their own toxic behavior. This scapegoat mapping reveals a parental structure built entirely on opposition. Mothers actively enforce this role through direct incrimination, severe emotional abuse, and deliberate neglect. Fathers reinforce the trauma through profound emotional and physical absence, effectively abandoning the child to the mother's attacks. This is a textbook mechanism of triangulation. The parents unify against the scapegoat, using the child as a shared enemy to artificially bond and avoid facing their own marital or psychological failings. The scapegoat's rebellion and hostility are not inherent character flaws. They are the logical fight response of a child designated to absorb the family's collective toxicity. This dual comparison highlights the final 2 roles managing system pressure through avoidance: the lost child, usually a middle child, and the mascot, overwhelmingly the youngest. The lost child relieves pressure by demanding absolutely nothing, surviving the toxic environment by achieving complete invisibility. This requires a profound degree of parental neglect. Fathers exhibit rigid authoritarianism or total absence, while mothers critically ignore the child's basic presence. The mascot manages tension using the exact opposite strategy. Their systemic function is to diffuse escalating conflict and divert imminent system collapse through hypervigilance, manic humor, and comic relief. This network map traces how parents inadvertently trap the mascot in a permanent state of arrested development. The mother's and father's attitudes perfectly mirror each other, with overwhelming pampering and excessive care, forcibly keeping the mascot immature and unable to process serious emotions. Whether through total withdrawal as the lost child or compulsive performance as the mascot, both siblings must sacrifice their authentic emotional development just to keep the system's baseline anxiety manageable. These survival strategies don't vanish when the individual leaves home. This chart illustrates structural dissociation, mapping how childhood roles morph into isolated adult subpersonalities. The hero trajectory flows into the internal manager, becoming hyper-successful leaders, carrying an invisible, crushing burden of burnout. Because the hero was parentified, often explicitly trained to replace a missing or passive spouse, this caretaking logic frequently migrates into their adult romantic lives. They seek out partners who require fixing or constant maintenance to fulfill the same role they were assigned in childhood. Mascots transition into a hybrid manager-firefighter role. They remain utterly unable to process serious personal grief, instead using compulsive humor to deflect massive internal anxiety. Research by Zagetka and Potter suggests that both the scapegoat and lost child roles are associated with higher instances of depression symptoms in adult life. However, the underlying psychological engines driving those symptoms are entirely different. The lost child becomes the internal exile, suffering from the profound isolation of a child whose needs were ignored. Conversely, the scapegoat becomes the internal firefighter, where adult distress stems from the chronic anger and trauma of being a designated systemic target. True psychological healing requires identifying and deconstructing these inherited systemic blueprints. Adult agency and authentic identity can only begin where systemic family compliance ends.